has been on here for a while. And I don't know how long it's been, Britt, but it's just great to have you back again. So Britt has his website, End Times Bible Prophecy. Britt has written several books, and Britt is brilliant, and it's wonderful to have you here. Britt, I get questions all the time from people saying, hey, do you know Britt Gillette? Can you connect me with Britt Gillette? He's so smart. I want to ask him about the economy. I want to ask him about digital currency. I want to ask him about this or that. And it's just great having you on with me. Great to be able to call you a friend, too.
Definitely. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. So are you ready?
Yes.
All right.
Bring it on.
So several things I'm going to ask you about, including you did a video not too long ago called This is Taking Place Right Now, which I want to get to. You have another one, it's engineered to trap you. It's all planned. You also did one with Pete Garcia, which I just had Pete Garcia on yesterday. That's called The Bleeding Edge. So, and several other things. But I do want to get to it's engineered to trap you. It's all planned. And this is taking place right now. I want to get to those in a few minutes. But before we get there, I want to ask you about the economy. Britt, I follow a lot of the secular news regarding the economy, and there's projections that 2024 is just going to be exceptionally bad. People are saying things were going to collapse in 2023. They haven't collapsed yet. We're at the end of the year. They were saying that in 2022. But I mean, how long can this whole thing go on? And what are some of the things that are taking place that nobody is even hearing about?
Sure. Yeah, well, I think we've been to the verge of seeing that collapse in 2023 to start with. Many people have forgotten, but back in March of this year, we had the second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in U.S. history. And that's accounting for inflation. So there were more bank failures by assets in 2023, even in the first 6 months of 2023, than there were in all of 2008. Wow. And they were able to delay this banking crisis that was taking place by patching over with a number of different solutions. One of those was the Federal Reserve created this program called the Bank Term Funding Program. And it basically said, you know, if you're a bank and you had this asset that you bought for $100 and it's now worth $50, well, you can loan it to, you give it to us. We'll give you the $100 and you just pay us back within the year. So that program came into being in March of this year. It's supposedly only going to last for 12 months. So we'll see in March if they renew that. My guess is they will, because if they don't, the banking system will collapse. But I think what's going on right now that most people aren't noticing, and I started to really see this toward the beginning of the month, and I put out a video about this at the time, was given what we've seen happen since October 7th, the Hamas attack on Israel, and we've seen the war that's going on there, we all are aware that we could see a major escalation of this conflict with Hezbollah on Israel's northern border. We could see Iran directly involved in some sort of conflict. We see the Houthi rebels in Yemen and essentially on the verge of shutting down all shipping traffic in the Red Sea. It's a major global implications for that. So we see this potential for a widespread conflict in the Middle East that would disrupt the free flow of oil. So against that backdrop, what I would expect to see is the price of oil go up. Doesn't have to go into the stratosphere, but I would expect that it would rise following that attack based on the prospect that we could see that greater regional conflict and see disruptions to the oil supply. But what we've seen is actually the opposite. Since mid-October, the price of oil has actually dropped. And the only thing that in and of itself, that doesn't mean anything. But to me, that makes me ask, well, why? What are the things that would make it drop? Do we see a massive increase of supply? No, we don't see that. We've actually seen OPEC announcing supply cuts all along the way leading up to that and since that time. So why are we seeing the price go down? The only explanation outside of just market manipulation is that we're seeing a decrease in demand. So if we saw a significant slowdown in the global economy, that's what we would expect to see. We would expect less oil to be used. We would expect to see that coming down. Now, we've also seen a number of events take place since that time. In October, we saw in Japan, there were 11 banks in Japan that basically shut down, and they called it a glitch. They said there's a big glitch. You can't make withdrawals or deposits. None of these transactions are working. It's just a glitch, is what they said. Then about 3 weeks goes by, and in early November, we had a glitch among the largest banks in the United States. So from Thursday to Monday, there were all sorts of people that made deposits on Thursday, and by Monday, they still hadn't gone through. Oh, it's a glitch, right? That's what they told us. And then you had a treasury auction that didn't go as planned. Oh, that was a glitch as well that didn't allow this one bank to participate. Then it happened again right around the time of Thanksgiving, and they said, oh, it was a ransomware attack. So we keep having all these glitches and issues that are going on. And then we had a recent comments by the Federal Reserve Chairman coming out and saying, well, after stating for a year and a half that we were going to raise rates to fight inflation, that we were going to stay higher for longer, that our goal is to get to 2% inflation. Until we get there, we're going to stay the course. Those comments that were made as recently as December 1st, where it was said, we aren't even thinking about rate cuts. Rate cuts aren't on the table. We may hike more. He came out on December 13th and said, well, there may be up to 3 rate cuts in 2024. So it's this complete about face between December 1st and December 13th. And you think, well, it's just 12 days. What happened? And so there's various speculations that are taking place. Some people claimed, well, it's the Biden administration has put pressure on the Federal Reserve in an election year. But I would expect that pressure has been put on the Fed for many months. Why all of a sudden in that 12-day period would they do this about face? And then if we look at the Federal Reserve's own data of that bank term funding program, we see that took off from 0 to $100 billion between March and June of this year, $100 billion that banks borrowed from the Fed to basically stay in business.
Wow.
That leveled off for much of the year. Then we saw a slight tick up around the time that these glitches started to occur. And then between December 1st and 13th, actually their date is the November 29th and December 13th. Through that period, we saw an extra $10 billion that banks borrowed. Now, what makes that even more significant is that we know the banks from FDIC data are sitting on $800 billion in unrealized losses because they own all of this government debt, treasuries. And when interest rates go up, the value of those bonds goes down. Now, in and of itself, that's not a problem unless they have to sell them. That's why they call them unrealized losses. Well, that's exactly what we saw back in March. Silicon Valley was sitting on this, and their depositors came and said, we want our cash. And the only way they could give them that cash was to sell those securities at a loss. And so we're in the same situation now. That situation hasn't been resolved. But what's interesting is since mid-October, we've seen interest rates on these government bonds go down, which means the value is going up. So those bank balance sheets should be getting better. But in spite of the fact that they should be getting better, we've seen the last 2 weeks, $10 billion being borrowed from that bank term facility. And you have to ask why. What has broken in the system? There is something that has gone on that is broken. We don't know about it yet. That's my opinion. But I think that it will prove right in the very near future. I think this is going to come to light that we are in the midst of another financial crisis, and then we'll see rates plummet down to near zero. I believe we're in the midst of a depression right now and have been for a couple of months. I think that we're going to go into a global depression on par with the Great Depression, but it won't be as lengthy as the Great Depression because the governments will simply print their way out of it. And it's actually going to be worse on the other side when we end up with hyperinflation as they just destroy the currencies, trying to prevent basically another Great Depression, because that's where we're headed with all this. We have too much debt. It's trillions of dollars of debt. We're sitting on the global economy has, I believe it's 2 to 4. We have no idea how many derivatives are out there, but it's estimated $2 to $4 quadrillion worth of derivatives. So to put that in perspective, the entire global economy is about $100 trillion. So you're talking 20 to 40 times the global economy. This is why Warren Buffett called these derivatives weapons of financial mass destruction, because, and we saw this in the great financial crisis with the failure of Lehman Brothers and then AIG and these other financial institutions. A lot of these financial institutions will say, well, these derivatives aren't a problem because, yeah, there are quadrillions of dollars of them. But if we lose on one of them, we've got another one on the other side that offsets it. And that's true as long as all parties can pay. But if one of those parties goes bankrupt, now you have what they call counterparty risk. And now it's blown a huge hole in the balance sheet of the other financial institution, and you end up with contagion. You have all of the financial institutions in the world stop lending to each other because they don't know who's going to be able to pay them back. And when you have that, you have a freezing of the credit markets. And what would happen is everything would stop. It would be the economic equivalent of the COVID shutdowns. You would have immediately your credit card wouldn't work, your bank card wouldn't work. We would probably have a banking holiday, which they haven't had in the United States since the Great Depression. You would have, everything would stop because everything in the economy moves on credit. So once the local gas station runs out of gasoline, once the local grocery store and restaurants run out of food, that's it until they can get that system back up and running, which may be a week or two. So I've been advising people to prepare accordingly. We have a lot of food in our pantry to navigate a 2 or 3 week bank holiday if that's what it takes. Make sure you drive around with a full gas tank. It doesn't hurt to do those things because, well, if I'm wrong, right, you just eat your food and use your gas anyway.
Yeah, you still got them.
But it's something is broken out there. We don't know what yet, but the whole financial system, the global financial system is a house of cards. It's a Ponzi scheme, and the global banking system is bankrupt. And so this is what we're headed for. We're headed for a collapse. And when I say that, some people get in their mind these images of this Mad Max scenario where it's grid down, every man for himself. It's not what we're talking about. A financial collapse just means a shifting, a transition from a dislocation within the economy, but it doesn't destroy buildings. It doesn't destroy farms. It doesn't destroy all of the things, the real world things that are out there. It just changes these paper wealth. Like some people who are wealthy today are going to be poor tomorrow. Some people who seem poor today may be wealthy tomorrow. But for the average person, what it probably is going to come down to is, will you still be employed as we see this play out? Because we're looking at a much more significant economic downturn than we saw during the great financial crisis, when millions of people lost their jobs in a matter of a few months. And I believe we're looking at something on par with the Great Depression, but again, not as long in duration, probably 12 to 18 months. And again, they will solve that, and I put that in air quotes, by simply conjuring cash out of thin air and handing it out to people. but
Well,
that's going to create its own set of problems. So,
well, I mean, it's very fascinating when you start looking at it and thinking about it. Will people have any money left in the bank? Because really, when a person puts their money in the bank, the bank uses that money. I mean, it's really not there. It's being used. And so if that money's gone, I mean, Silicon Valley Bank is a perfect illustration of what happens.
right.
And so happening on a much greater scale with everything that you're saying. Now, this isn't really a surprise if you understand Bible prophecy, because we know as we look at the four horsemen of the apocalypse, you come to the third one, you have this black horse that represents a global economic collapse that with a time that appears to be hyperinflation, a day's wage for a loaf of bread.
Right.
So when you, I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking in my mind, okay, we have a Great Depression, absolutely devastating, but it's not going to last too long because these globalists, these governments, they're going to have to fix the problem. So they just print up more money, which kicks the can down the road to something that's going to be far worse. And is what sounds like you're describing. If you put it into that thinking, this takes us into the tribulation period with a time far worse, where these governments have created chaos. Some of it, I believe, they plan to create, but it's also going to get out of their control too. Where Antichrist will step on the scene and say, hey, I have the answer.
Right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. There's plans. They know mathematically the system is coming to an end. The current monetary system that we're on, the current global financial system. They want to hold on to it as long as possible because that's where they derive their power from. But in the meantime, they're making plans for what's going to be the replacement system so that we can control that. And then let's try to transition over. But as anybody who's studied war knows, the best laid plans die in the opening shot of battle. They don't know for sure. So they're going to hold on to the system until they can't. Once they realize they can't, they're going to let it run. And they're going to use that, I believe, to implement central bank digital currencies and roll that out. And I think it's interesting what you said, because most people, when you think about bank accounts, most people think that's my money and I'm putting it in the bank. They don't realize, one, you are a creditor to the bank. So it becomes the bank's cash when you put it in there, and you're an unsecured creditor. They changed the legislation after the 08-09 crisis to have bank bail-ins, because everybody said, I don't like these bailouts for the big banks. All the Wall Street people, they're getting bailed out. Taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for that. And they said, okay. So they switched it to bank bail-ins. Well, what's a bank bail-in? Well, it means if you've got cash in the bank above that FDIC limit in the United States, it's different in other nations, and the bank goes bankrupt, well, that cash above that threshold now becomes a part ownership in the bank. You were the one that was timely bailed out the bank. They just call it a bail-in. And we've seen this happen in Cyprus about a decade ago. Mm-hmm. But the key is your ownership in that bank is going to be a small fraction of what you had in the bank. The other thing people don't realize is back during the COVID shutdowns, the amount of reserves that had to be held on hand by the banks, deposit reserves, was set to 0. Right.
Wow.
Most people think, wow. I put my cash in the bank and they keep a little to the side for people that come to withdraw, and they lend the others out to people in the community. No, that's not how it works. They when they lend out cash, they just sort of make it up. They go, oh, okay, here, we'll create this money in your account and you can go spend it. Right. And now you owe it to us. It just comes out of nowhere. It's a big Ponzi scheme is all it is. And it's dependent, just like a Ponzi scheme, on a growing level of debt to keep the system going. And when we get to the point where that debt can grow no more, it comes crashing down. And so they know that day is coming and they're preparing for it with a new system to put in place.
Yeah, it is so fascinating. I'm glad you said Ponzi scheme because when you look at it, that's what all it really is. It's legalized, and the richest people in the world are behind it, and they're controlling most of the things that are out there. You think you put your money in the bank, and let's say you have 50 grand in the bank, just a number, and then you want to go borrow money from the bank to get a car loan. Well, you got your money in there, and you're borrowing, and you're paying the bank whatever the interest rate is now. And you look, you go, wait a minute. I mean, the whole thing is just moving all of this around, and guess who's left holding the bag with nothing in it? Eventually, it's going to be us. And I mean, you look at the whole system. Okay, with CBDCs, you're known as somewhat of an expert on CBDCs. I've read several things that you have written over the years and watched videos that you've done on digital currencies, which is another reason that leads me to believe this is why they know the system's not going to work much longer, but it will be. I believe there's a planned collapse of it in order to implement these digital currencies. Now, CBDCs are also they're known as surveillance. It's really a surveillance currency, isn't it? How does that work, and what are the real fears behind it?
Well, I mean, when you're looking at something that's electronic, it's based on an electronic network. In theory, if you're using your credit card everywhere you go, if you're using your debit card, they can see all of those things as well. But the key is your financial institution is seeing it. It's not necessarily centralized to the government, even though the government could get to that data and probably does get to that data. But you also have cash that people are still using throughout the system. And so the first step of this, and we've already seen this going on for years, is they're putting limits on withdrawals and deposits of cash. We've seen some banks, one of the largest banks in Australia came out and said by the end of the year, this was a few months ago, we're done with cash transactions. So, and by 2030, all of Australia has said they're going to be done with cash transactions and checks. So what's left but electronic transactions? So by that time, they plan to be there. Well, now if you think about it, okay, a lot of businesses are cash-based. If they have nowhere to deposit that cash, are you gonna risk taking that cash to your house, having it catch on fire, or somebody breaks in and steals it? Or are you gonna just say, you know what, I'm gonna go cashless? And then as a consumer, if all the businesses that you frequent won't take cash anymore because their bank won't accept it, then even if you get cash, where are you going to be spending it? So they're already starting on that side by elimination of cash. That's step one. Then step two is, well, how do we get people to buy into the system? And ironically, it's probably going to be the surveillance features of that currency that they use to help sell it. Because if we have a collapse on par with what we're talking about, then one of the ways that they'll sell that is we need to create the new system with this because we can create it to set it. We've already got the infrastructure in place, but we also need 21st century regulation for the 21st century banking system. So we heard them saying this back in March when we had the bank failures that, well, Silicon Valley Bank didn't have, your typical bank run out the door. People can just get on their phones and transfer cash from one bank to another. And so, and they actually want that because that still keeps it in the system. Now it's gone to the other bank and made the other bank, but at the time we saw these articles, and it's that time of year where we watch It's a Wonderful Life. It's one of my favorite movies, but you had the Bailey Brothers Savings and Loan, and they had a bank run, which was typical in the 1930s and the Great Depression. You had this line of people waiting outside the door, waiting to withdraw all of their cash because they had heard that the institution was going to go bankrupt. And so they're saying, well, now, people can just do that on their phone. Yet we still had the same type of regulations in place as the 1930s. We need to update our regulations. And a little over a year ago, they held this. I would call it a war game. It was called the FDIC Systemic Resolution. I forget what else they called it, but basically it was this round table of people from the FDIC and other government agencies trying to figure out what they would do in the event of the things we're talking about right now. Which, as you know, in the last few years, there's been a lot of that. They create the scenario, and then lo and behold, it happens not long later. But there were a number of things in there, such as one of the participants said, "Well, you and I don't have any faith in the banking system, but we need, you and I don't have it." Ha ha ha! And they all laughed. They said, "But we need to make sure the public does." And everybody seized on that comment correctly. But there was another one later where somebody brought up, "Well, how about non-financial, systemically important institutions?" So we're looking at these large banks that if one of them failed, it would cause this financial contagion and possibly collapse the whole global economy. But what about the ones that we don't regulate, such as hedge funds? Do we have any insight into that? And the answer was, well, no. You would have to have an act of Congress. Supreme Court would have to be, there's just no way we can know that. And so my guess is whatever happens, they'll shift blame to one of those entities. It may be some obscure hedge fund, or maybe the next Ponzi person like Bernie Madoff, if you remember him from the great financial crisis. He was actually running a Ponzi scheme. And they'll say, well, if we had central bank digital currency in place, we would know that. We had that back in 2008. We would have known Bernie Madoff's running a Ponzi scheme because we saw he didn't buy any securities with this cash that came into the accounts. We would know if this hedge fund got a bank loan using this collateral and then turned around and talked to another bank and used the same collateral. And then when they failed, it caused this crisis that's the reason you lost your job. That's the reason you lost your house, all of these things. So if we had this in place, it would prevent that from happening again. And that will sell that to a lot of people. And then they would also say, well, we can use this to restore that which you've lost. Now, there was a book put out in the last few months called The Great Taking. Yeah. People want to check it out. It's thegreattaking.com. But it talks about how the laws have been changed over the last several decades to where you don't own what you think you own. So most people, when I say, well, I want to buy a share of Hershey stock. So I go and I put cash in the brokerage account and I buy that. I own it, right? Well, no, you own a security entitlement, and you're not first in line in the event that there's a bankruptcy of this system like we're talking about. That actually is going to be probably one of these financial entities. So they're going to take that, which I can't imagine is going to make the politicians very popular, right? So people are going to be demanding this back. Well, we can restore everything with these central bank digital currencies. We can restore what you had in that account. When people lose their pensions, when people lose their retirement accounts, when people lose their cash in the bank, they will be more than willing to accept a central bank digital currency replacement if the alternative is, sorry, you lost it all. And so they're going to have us.
I look at this, Britt, and I think, right now there's so much resistance to digital currency. However, when people are starving and start losing everything, there will be a sudden surrender like, okay, this is the answer. I just need to put groceries back on the table. Everything's been closed for 3 weeks. I ran out of food that was in my pantry. I ran out of gasoline in my car, and people will be under the pressure. They will be willing to submit to it. I want to ask you a few more things. You talked quite a bit on the digital currencies in your video that you recently did. This is taking place right now. Also, it's engineered to trap you. It's all planned, which I want to ask you about that, although you already covered some of that here. But real quick, everybody, quick reminder on New Year's Eve, coming up Sunday, at 5:30 p.m. Brandon Holthouse is going to be joining me live. It's going to be in-house. He's going to be sitting right next to me. It is going to be a great time. We have an annual prophecy update every year on New Year's Eve. I've been doing them for over 25 years now. And we are going to look at where we've been in 2023. Brandon and I are going to project into 2024. And it's going to be a great time. It's going to be in-house. We're also going to have communion together. So join us if you can. The information is at hopeforourtimes.com under the events. It's this Sunday night, December 31, New Year's Eve, 5:30 to 7 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time. It'll be an hour and a half long. Hope you can join us. All right, Britt, back to where we are. And also, don't forget to check out Britt's website. I mean, guys, you're going to be so blessed. EndTimesBibleProphecy.com. Just Google his name, Britt Gillette. You'll find it. Or End Times Bible Prophecy. You'll be able to find it that way. You're going to be super blessed. It's interesting you mentioned The Taking, that book. I happen to have the video open right now while I'm not watching it, but it's open on my laptop right now to go. I already watched it once. I was getting ready to watch it again. You mentioned it. Check it out, everybody. But as you mentioned, your title of a recent video was, "It's engineered to trap you. It's all planned." And that's exactly how I see it. In Proverbs chapter 29, the Bible says, Solomon wrote, the fear of man is a trap. It's a snare. But it's God who keeps us safe. And it's fear after fear after fear that they keep leading us along, and we're here to take care of you. Obviously, climate fears, health fears, and now everything you're talking about here. We've got the answer. But it is engineered to trap you. The whole banking system really is, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole monetary system is a scam. You know, we hear people talking about capitalism, but we haven't had that in over 100 years. When you have central banks that can create currency at a whim, that are saying we're controlling interest rates, and you have everybody gather around to hear what words the central bankers utter, that's not a free economy. That's not capitalism. That's an economy it's a command and control economy. 50% of every financial transaction is the currency you're using. So if the currency is manipulated and controlled, then at least half the economy is. And then you add in all the other government interventions. A very small percentage of the economy is actually free markets and free. This is a manipulation. They've been using this process to steal from us for decades. This is, I hear people talk about, look at the national debt, look at all the cash these governments are spending, and what are we leaving to our grandchildren? They're going to have to pay for all of this. And I say, well, reality check, you've been paying for it the whole time. That's why, the loaf of bread that cost a quarter 60 years ago costs $7 today, because you've been paying for it through inflation of the currency. The purchasing power of the currency has been eroded, and that's what people are getting paid in. So they've taught people to work for these worthless pieces of paper that are slowly being devalued, and they're taking that value. It's not just disappearing. It's going somewhere else. That's why we see the rich getting richer, and we see this control taking place. We see the whole retirement system. When you see people putting money into 401ks, and well, those are controlled mostly by BlackRock and Vanguard and a handful of companies. And so somebody votes those shares. So you may, forget the great taking for a moment. Let's say you actually owned all of those securities. Well, you haven't been voting for the boards of directors at all of those companies. Who's been doing that? Well, whoever, the ETF, the index fund that bought those shares on your behalf is doing that. And that's why BlackRock and Vanguard have so much power, because they essentially control all of those companies using the money of the general population that we willingly put in paycheck after paycheck. And so it's a scam. They've engineered all of this to pull power to themselves. Again, they know the system's coming to an end because they know it's a Ponzi scheme. They're actively working to put things in place for the next system. They're trying to get that set up before the system collapses. That's why they're hold it. I believe they are trying to hold this back and prevent it from happening. But once they lose control of it, they'll let it run. All of the politically connected people will get bailed out, and everybody else will have to fend for themselves. That's how it works, unfortunately. That's the world we live in.
Yeah, well, and they can't let this whole thing collapse until they know they're going to be ready with the next system.
Right.
So that's probably one of the reasons why the can has been kicked down the road so many times, is because the other system just hasn't been quite ready yet.
Sure. Yeah, but they're on the verge of having that system ready to roll out.
Do you foresee this taking place in 2024?
I would expect to see a major banking crisis by March of 2024. Now, in regard to implementation of central bank digital currencies for every transaction people make, I don't know that would happen in 2024, but I would expect to see us move much further down that road than we are now as part of that process, because I don't know that they can kick the can much further down the road than what we're seeing here, because in the past when they did that, we didn't have the inflationary problems that we're having now. So they're very limited in what they can do without causing outright hyperinflation, which would make the inflation we've seen the last 3 years look like just a little blip on the radar. We would long for the days of the last 3 years. And I know that sounds bad because many people are struggling to buy groceries to feed themselves, but that's unfortunately where we're headed for this. There's no way out in the current system. There's two paths. There's a deflationary spiral, as we saw in the Great Depression, with bankruptcy after bankruptcy and millions of job losses. And then we print to bail out the system and cause the death of the currencies involved, which, guys, is globally, every currency used on the planet is a fiat currency, meaning nothing's backed it. That's been the case since 1971. It was not the case throughout history prior to that time. There was always some sort of gold-backed currency, or people were using actual silver and gold. Now, I point out to a lot of people I know, my parents a lot of times would say, well, I remember when I could go to the drive-through and get a hamburger for 25 cents and fries for 10 cents. And the thing is, you can still do that today if you've got that quarter and dime from back then, 1960, pre-1964. They were actual silver. They were made of silver. Now it's not made of silver anymore. But if you had those actual silver quarter, it's $7 or so. And if you've got a silver dime, it would cost $3 to buy one of those. You can still go buy a burger and fries for that quarter and dime.
That's a great that's a great way of looking at that. What a great comparison when you checking that out.
All the currencies now, they're fiat-based currencies. All the governments have no restraint when it comes to spending, and they're going to destroy the currencies. And we've had hyperinflations in the past. We've had them in Weimar Germany and post-World War I Austria-Hungary, and we've had them in Zimbabwe and Venezuela. We've never had hyperinflation on a global scale before, which, as you pointed out earlier, is what's described in Revelation chapter 6. And so we live in a world today where really for the first time we could see that, because we live in a global interconnected economy with these global supply chains, and everybody's using worthless currency.
Worthless currency. So you wrote a book in 2017 called Racing Towards Armageddon, Why Advanced Technology Signals the End Times. So as we look at where we are now, here's a question for you. How do rapidly evolving technologies such as AI and the UN's push for digital public infrastructure initiatives align with this?
Well, what the UN is pushing is for digital IDs, digital payments, tokenization of assets, and these digital payment systems. So they're trying to create the very system we're talking about on a global scale. The Bank of International Settlements released this paper called Project Icebreaker, where they said, oh yeah, hey, all of these nations, and now you want to create these digital central bank digital currencies because every nation wants to control its population and surveil them. But we need to do this on a standard, because if you're in one country and you want to trade with somebody in another, you need to figure out how to trade those currencies. Hey, we'll do that, right? We'll set up the backbone system, and it essentially would make them the global arbiter of this digital economy, and it would create something that is indistinguishable. I like to say indistinguishable in function from the mark of the beast. It's not the mark of the beast, but it creates the infrastructure and puts that in place for the mark of the beast to be able to appear during the tribulation, because we wouldn't expect that to just come out of nowhere. We would expect the pieces to be put in place leading up to that time period. And that's what we're seeing today.
Well, everything coming together so rapidly, too. Just with that, as we relate all of this to the Bible, I look at 2024 and listening to you, and it's the reality that we need to be ready for whatever is coming. And most importantly, is we need to be ready to meet Jesus. And for those out there who don't know the Lord, listen, all these things are coming together exactly as the Bible says. And it's only by Christ that we can be forgiven. What would be a final exhortation you would have for everybody?
Well, I would encourage everybody. I know some people get scared when they hear about some of the things we're talking about, and there's no need to be scared. We should be concerned over these things, and we should care about what's happening in the world and that people are suffering. But guys, if you've built your life upon the rock of the Lord Jesus Christ, you can endure anything. The sufferings of this world, no matter what is done to us, pales in comparison to what awaits us. Jesus is coming back. He should be your hope. He should be where your eyes are fixed. Jesus will give you a peace that surpasses all understanding if you invite him into your life and make him the Lord of your life. None of this stuff will faze you. You'll laugh at it in many ways. Oftentimes I'll laugh at this stuff and I'll get comments from people. How can you laugh over something so serious? Because it's gotten to that point where you just have to laugh at it. And, the Bible talks about God laughing in Psalm 2 at the kings of the world gathering together and plotting against him. I know Jesus is in control. He's already won the victory. And so if you don't know Jesus, first you need to recognize your need for him, that we're all sinners. That just means we've fallen short of God's mark of perfection. But and that means that we're condemned. The Bible says the wages of sin is death. So as a result of that sin, we're condemned to death and a waterless grave. But the good news is that Jesus came to earth, lived a sinless life, perfect life, and died on the cross. He shed his blood so that our sins could be forgiven and we could be reconciled with God. And guys, there's no better news than that. It means there is glory awaiting us. Christ has already won the victory, no matter what any of these people do between now and the millennial kingdom. We know Jesus has already won, and that should put a smile on your face. And when we see all these signs, Jesus said in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, when you begin to see all these things happen, know that I am near. I'm right at the door. Look up. Your salvation is near. Jesus is coming back. And so we can hang our hopes on that and on him in the face of all of these terrible things that are taking place in the world.
Amen. Thank you, Britt, for joining us today. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Remember, everything that Britt just shared, most important thing is, who is Jesus Christ? He's come to forgive you of your sins. And also, I want to just encourage you, check out everything that Britt has. You can go to his website, End Times Bible Prophecy. You're going to be blessed by all the videos he does, or all the articles he's written and writes. And even his book. So check it out, End Times Bible Prophecy. You'll be blessed. And also join us this Sunday, 5:30 p.m. Pacific time if you can. It's Brandon Holt House. We're going to be doing a live annual New Year's Eve prophecy update. God bless you, everybody. Hope to see you Sunday.